Morning. Morning. Par contre, monsieur, café, on peut pas à l'intérieur.
Je peux rester dehors?
Oui, pas de souci. Buvez à votre aise. Hein.
Ok.
Comment ça, oui, ça commence maintenant.
Ça commence, c'est pas commencé.
Good morning, dear colleagues. The sitting is open. One announcement from my side in relation to the decisions by the PESH, IMCO and LIBE committees to enter into interinstitutional negotiations pursuant to Rule 71, paragraph 1, announced at the opening of the sitting last Monday, 2nd of May. I have received the requests for vote in Parliament pursuant to Rule 71, paragraph 2 from the ID and ECR groups, reaching at least the medium threshold on the decisions of the LIBE Committee to enter into negotiations on the two proposals for regulations concerning the EU Digital COVID Certificate, and the votes will be held tomorrow. Concerning the other decisions to enter into negotiations, I have received no request for a vote in Parliament by members or a political group or groups reaching at least the medium threshold, and therefore the committees may start the negotiations on the basis of these reports. The next item on the agenda is a Council and Commission statements, the social and economic consequences for the European Union of the Russian war in Ukraine, reinforcing the European Union's capacity to act. I'll start by giving the floor to Brigitte Klinker for the Council. Brigitte, you have the floor.
La présidente du Parlement européen.
Madam President of the European Parliament, President of the European Commission, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Parliament. The United Nations Agency for Refugees believes that over 5 million Ukrainian civilians have already left their country due to military aggression from Russia. During the last informal meeting in Versailles, the heads of state and government in Europe have firmly condemned the unjustified military intervention and unprovoked aggression from Russia against Ukraine, and they reaffirmed that the European Union and its member states will continue to provide political, financial, material and humanitarian aid in a coordinated manner. The member states have made significant coordinated efforts to take in millions of refugees. Beyond the humanitarian crisis, it has also inevitably led to the slowdown of the post-COVID recovery period. Coordinated European actions have allowed us to offset the worst of the social and economic consequences, but there are still major challenges ahead of us. This wave of refugees will undoubtedly have budgetary consequences which are difficult to estimate for the European Union and its member states, particularly the member states that border Ukraine. However, it represents an opportunity for the European Union if the refugees want to integrate in a long-term manner into the labour market into their host countries. In April, we adopted a budget which would allow us to mobilise different European funds in order to finance the welcome of Ukrainian refugees. For example, investing in education, employment, housing, healthcare, childcare services, and also in basic material assistance. Furthermore, on the 4th of March, the Council unanimously adopted an implementing decision which would allow us to set up temporary protection for people fleeing war in Ukraine and will ensure harmonised rights throughout the European Union while ensuring that there is a fair share of the effort being made between member states. It's the right to live and work in the European Union, but also to have access to social care. Some member states are also providing financial support to refugees when they arrive. In order to provide support for school-aged children, they will have access to national education systems. Adults can have access to training courses and integration into the labour market through the active implementation of public services for employment and involving social partners. In economic terms, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the sanctions and countermeasures, their impact on the value and transport chains, and the cuts to international transport, these are all also going to have an impact on the European economy that's already been weakened by the COVID-19 crisis, and this will be a long-term impact. Raw materials such as wheat, cereals and energy will be affected. Increasing inflation in the EU is going to impact our businesses, as well as energy supply and security, and we will have to fight against certain shortages as a priority. The member states in Versailles agreed to reduce member states' dependence on gas and oil and coal from Russia, as well as on their dependence on fossil fuels. In order to be freer from Gazprom and in order to ensure supply chains, Europe has to diversify its supply to accelerate the production of green energy, to ensure that they have joint purchasing for energies and reduce demand. At the same time, we have to maintain our competitiveness on the global level in the long term, even though we are seeing higher energy costs. Reducing our dependency will require a certain number of actions, such as the digital and green transitions. Under the French presidency, the Council is doing everything it can to ensure the supply of gas in the coming winter. Therefore, it's necessary to ensure strong European solidarity and to ensure that we respect the sanctions that we have set. I also welcome the fact that the Commission will be presenting the Repower EU programme on the 18th of May in order to take European joint actions in favour of more affordable, safer and more sustainable energy. We are at a historic turning point in terms of our energy independence and our transition. The green transition will provide new opportunities for jobs, and in the long term it will free us from our energy independency that is holding us back. Clearly, the social short-term effects, particularly for the most vulnerable, have to be re-examined in light of the current situation and how it evolves. Currently, this transition is our only viable solution. Therefore, we have to accelerate our efforts on energy efficiency, on renewables, and on hydrogen. Energy poverty today affects about 34 million people in the European Union. That's about 1 in 5 people whose income is below the poverty threshold. They declare that they cannot afford to properly heat their home. As we announced in the Fit for 55 package, in order to ensure a fair transition towards climate neutrality, the Commission has said that it will examine the green transition's impact on the social sector and on employment. The Commission has also undertaken discussions in view of the final adoption of recommendations which will ensure a fair transition towards climate neutrality and which will also fight energy poverty and will ensure targeted actions for individuals to ensure that they have essential energy services. We will have further monitoring of the implementation of the fair transition, and particularly looking at its impact on the most marginalised groups and those most at risk of energy poverty. Some member states have also already ensured access to energy for the most vulnerable groups as a priority, in line with Target 20 of the European social goals. We have to act in a decisive manner in order to fight against the worst effects of the conflict on our societies and our economies, and ensuring that we show solidarity and unity between member states in our actions. Our priority has to be protecting and consolidating our economic and social model, at the same time ensuring that nobody is left behind. Thank you all very much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Klinker. And now I invite the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, dear Roberta, Madame la Ministre, honorable members. Next week, we will mark Europe Day. It is the 72nd birthday of our Union, and on this Europe Day, we will talk about, of course, the future of our Union, how we make it stronger, more resilient, closer to the people. But the answer to all these questions we cannot give alone in these days. The answer is also given in Ukraine. It is given in Kharkiv, where Ukrainian first responders venture into the combat zone to help those wounded by Russian attacks. It is given in the small town of Bucha, where survivors are coping with the atrocities committed against civilians by Russian soldiers. And it is given these days in Mariupol, where Ukrainians are resisting a Russian force which greatly outnumbers them, because they are fighting to reaffirm basic ideas, that they are the master of their future and not a foreign leader, that it is the international law that counts and not the right of might, and that Putin must pay a price, a high price, for his brutal aggression. Thus, the future of our European Union is also written in Ukraine. And therefore, today I would like to speak about two topics. First, about sanctions, and second, about relief and reconstruction for Ukraine. Today, we are presenting our sixth package of sanctions. First, we are listing high-ranking military officers and individuals who committed war crimes in Bucha, and those who are responsible for the inhuman siege of the city of Mariupol. This sends another important signal to all perpetrators of the Kremlin. We know who you are. We will hold you accountable. You're not getting away with this. Second, we finally de-SWIFT Sberbank. Sberbank is the largest Russian bank. It holds round about 37% of the whole banking sector. And we will also de-SWIFT two other major banks in Russia. By that, we hit banks that are systemically critical to the Russian financial system and Putin's ability to wage destruction. This will solidify the complete isolation of the Russian financial sector from the global system. Third, we're banning 3 big Russian state-owned broadcasters from our airwaves. They will not be allowed to distribute their content anymore in the European Union in whatever shape or form, be it on cable, via satellite, on the internet, or via smartphone apps. We have identified these TV channels as mouthpieces that amplify Putin's lies and propaganda aggressively, and we should not give them a stage anymore to spread these lies. Fourth, the Kremlin relies on accountants, consultants, and spin doctors from Europe, and this will now stop. We're banning those services from being provided to Russian companies. And my final point, number 5, on sanctions is oil. When the leaders met in Versailles, they agreed to phase out our dependency on Russian fossil fuels. In the last sanction package, as you know, we started with coal. Today, we are addressing our dependency on Russian oil, and let's be clear, it will not be easy, because some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to do it. So today, we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline, crude and refined. We will make sure that we phase out Russian oil in an orderly fashion, so in a way that allows us and our partners to secure alternative supply routes and at the same time be very careful that we minimize the impact on the global market. And this is why we will phase out Russian supply of crude oil within 6 months and refined products by the end of the year. Thus, we maximize the pressure on Russia, while at the same time, and this is important, we minimize the collateral damage to us and our partners around the globe, because to help Ukraine, we have to make sure that our economy remains strong. Honorable members, with all these steps, we are depriving the Russian economy from its ability to diversify and to modernize. Putin wanted to wipe out Ukraine from the map, and he will clearly not succeed. On the contrary, Ukraine has risen in bravery and in unity, and it is his own country, Russia, that Putin is sinking. Honorable members, we want Ukraine to win this war, but we also want to set the condition for Ukraine's success in the aftermath of the war. And this is my second point: relief and reconstruction. The first step is immediate relief. This is about short-term economic support to help Ukrainians cope with the fallout of the war. We have done a lot already. Let me remind you our microfinancial assistance package or the direct support to the Ukrainian budget. In addition, we recently proposed to suspend all import duties on Ukrainian exports to our union for 1 year. And I'm sure that the European Parliament will put its weight behind this idea and this proposal. But we all know this is not enough for the short-term relief. Ukraine's GDP is expected to fall by 35% to 50% this year alone. And the IMF estimates that from May on, Ukraine needs 5 billion euros per month, plain and simply to keep the country running, so to pay pensions, to pay salaries, to provide for basic services. We have to support them, but I also know that we cannot do this alone. So I very much welcome that the United States announced massive budgetary support, and we, as Team Europe, we have to do our share too. But then in a second phase, there is the wider reconstruction effort, and you all know that the scale of the destruction is staggering. Hospitals and schools, houses, roads, bridges, railroads, theaters, factories, you just name it. So much has to be rebuilt. Of course, in the fog of war, it is difficult to come up with a precise estimate, but economists are talking about several hundred billion euros. And here, honorable members, I think Europe has a very special responsibility towards Ukraine. With our support, and of course with the help of the international financial institutions and other global partners, Ukraine can rebuild their country for the next generation. And this is why today I propose to you that we start working on an ambitious recovery package for our Ukrainian friends. If we do it right, this package should bring massive investments to meet the needs and the necessary reforms in parallel. So it should address the existing weaknesses of the Ukrainian economy and lay the foundation for sustainable long-term growth. It could set a system of milestones and targets to make sure that the European money truly delivers to the people of Ukraine and is spent in accordance with European rules. It could help fight corruption, we have to do that. It could align the legal environment with European standards and radically upgrade Ukraine's productive capacity. And this will bring the stability and the certainty that is needed to make Ukraine an attractive destination for foreign direct investment. And eventually, honorable members, it will pave the way for Ukraine's future inside the European Union. Slava Ukraine, long live Europe.
Thank you very much, Commission President. I now give the floor to the representatives of the political groups, starting with the EPP Group, Esther de Lange.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Minister, Madam President of the European Commission. Beste collega's, het is vandaag...
Colleagues, it's the 4th of May today, and in the Netherlands that means at 8 o'clock this evening we all stay still for 2 minutes. The country falls silent and thinks of the victims of the Second World War and all of those who died during peace missions and operations. And on a day like today, it seems a little bit strange to be talking here about the economic consequences of the war here in Europe. It is there is now war on our continent, and the consequences here in the EU are affected by what's happening in Ukraine.
And should remain not on the economic consequences here, but on the consequences in Ukraine and how to help them against Putin's barbaric war. And this is why I'm very grateful to the Commission that they will announce their 6th sanctions package today, and for the words that the Commission has spoken about the reconstruction and the help to Ukraine. But that being said, we should also talk about the socio-economic consequences here and our capacity to act. Because as a European Union, unity is our strongest weapon against this war. And if we want to sustain this unity, we also need to address the consequences here. I think, Madam President of the Commission, for the EPP, we badly need an analysis of the cumulative effect of the war, the rising energy prices, the shortages in raw materials, new legislation on the table, the impact that has on companies and on citizens within the EU. We need to address the consequences also on families. Some of them not even turning on their heating because they can no longer do so. And this is why, of course, we're working to address these consequences in the fund that is proposed. And finally, we need to work to address the consequences on companies and on industries. And for the EPP, that means a diversification strategy for raw materials, I think, which is badly needed. The necessary investment for the rollout of renewable energy. And finally, let's be very honest, we are asking a lot from our industries. And don't get me wrong, the EPP wants to achieve the objectives of the Fit for 55 package and the climate law. But we may have to look at a legislative embargo for new legislation to make sure that we're not burdening certain industries that are suffering badly with the cumulative effect of higher prices, the ambitious Fit for 55 package, and, for example, let me mention one piece of legislation, new REACH at the same time. Let's be honest. We stand ready to work with you, but let's do it in a smart way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. De Lange. And now, on behalf of the S&D Group, I invite Irache Garcia Perez to take the floor.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Let's be frank, ladies and gentlemen. We are at war. The European Union is supporting Ukraine as a country that has been aggressed with all means available: sanctions, arms, help to refugees, and diplomacy. Without the courage of the Ukrainian people and the support of the European Union and our allies, Ukraine would not have been able to withstand the criminal aggression of Putin, nor frustrated his plans for a rapid victory. Now we're going to see a decisive battle in Donbass, and we need to continue. The next step has to be cutting off gas and oil, as the President of the Commission said, and this is in line with what the Parliament had already said. At the same time, we have to work on a strategy to deconnect ourselves from this gas, building regasification plants, and we have to see alternative suppliers and quickly accelerate renewables. I think now more than ever, we need to make progress in our policies to fight climate change, because these are the ones which clearly show our shortcomings as the European Union. Beating Putin does not mean leaving those countries that are most affected by their high level of dependency on Russian gas and oil to their fate. I'm aware that some countries that are going to be much more affected by these decisions than others. Beating Putin means resisting, strengthening our determination, and reacting together faced with this crucial moment in history, without, of course, forgetting the asymmetrical effects of this crisis. I understand, therefore, that it's necessary to stand by the principle of solidarity and to use all means available to do this. Beating Putin also means putting an end to first and second level European Union citizens. We have to incorporate Romania and Bulgaria into Schengen and ensure that we protect our values. We have to implement the principle, the fundamental principle of the European Union, which is solidarity, supporting refugees. It's not possible that on the one hand we say thank you to these countries for the way that they're handling refugees, but at the other hand we're not able to say that they have the same rights as all other countries when they meet all of the criteria that are necessary to be part of the Schengen zone. And this is particularly what I want to draw Council's attention to. Our citizens are aware of the tragedy that is being lived at the moment. And now it's the Commission that has to be up to the financial challenge that we're going to see. And they have to make all means available. We need a big, urgent economic plan, which will put a brake on rising poverty, inequality and unemployment, and loss of purchasing power as a consequence of the rampant inflation that has been caused by the rising costs of fuel and food. It's unacceptable that while the big energy companies are making huge profits and that seem to be falling from the sky, it's the most vulnerable people who are paying for the consequences of this war. This money is going into the pockets of some people, but it's leading to the suffering of other families that today can't pay their heating bill. And they're struggling to get to the end of the month. And so we have to do something here. We can't repeat the errors of the past, whereby we make cuts in the middle of a crisis. We have to extend the escape clause in the Stability and Growth Pact. We have to invest in new technologies, social justice, and a more secure future where we are free of our dependence on coal. If the European Union wants to be an international leader against autocracy, then we have to ensure that we protect the most vulnerable people against the consequences of Putin, from Africa to closer to home. If Moldova wants to be an independent state and part of this free zone, then they have to have our financial and military commitment. This is a historic moment. We are coming to rebuild and construct peace in Europe on our borders. However, there can be no peace without justice, because it's the humiliated and the wronged, as Dostoevsky reminds us, who require respite from their suffering, who require justice. The only way to ensure that we have proper peace is to defeat Putin and to see victory for liberty and democracy in Ukraine. This needs unity from us and for us to make sacrifices. In 2012, we were able to do this to protect the euro, and we stood firm in 2020 against the pandemic, and in 2022 we will stand firm to preserve peace and democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garcia Perez. Next, on behalf of the Renew Group, Luis Garicano.
Thanks, Madam President. It's good to see that I'm the fifth speaker and the first man, so that's a good. Just a quick few reactions to your proposals, Madam von der Leyen. I was very happy to hear about this RRF2, this Recovery and Reconstruction Fund, using the lessons from what we learned for Ukraine. That's good news. There was no news on how to finance it, so I hope that's coming. Also, I think that spending on reconstruction is very good, but as you very well said, there are very urgent funding needs, and we need to see how we're going to address them. And third, you mentioned the embargo on oil. This Parliament is really happy to hear that. Congratulations, and that's great news that we are moving on the oil embargo. But as you know, this is far short of what this Parliament wants. We actually asked a month ago for a full embargo on gas and oil. While the debate goes on, the EU has sent to Russia 50 billion euros since the start of the year, 52 billion today. And by the time we get all this oil embargo set, etc., Putin will have received over 100 billion euros more in revenues. We are now in the worst of all worlds. Consumers are paying the higher prices, but these high prices are sufficiently high that Putin gets higher revenues than before, more than compensated for the loss of volume. And some say nothing else can be done, and this is false. There is a clear solution which will collapse Russian revenue, incentivize substitution, protect consumers, and even, Madame von der Leyen, increase EU resources. What is this miracle? It is the oldest trick in the book, a tariff. A tariff on Russian energy would allow us to shift some of the extra revenues from higher gas and oil prices to us, the consumers, from the Russian producers. With a tariff, the price that European consumers pay will go up a little bit. Some consumers will continue consuming, some of them will stop. It depends on how much need they have. But the gap between the price that the consumers pay and what the Russians receive is actually the revenue from the tariff that would flow to the European taxpayers, the European Union, and that could be given back to Europeans to compensate for the higher gas prices. And the suppliers would be the one facing the trouble, since a lower quantity is going to be supplied, it will be supplied at a lower price. Don't forget that Russian oil and gas suppliers are desperately dependent on European purchases. Between us and our allies, we purchase 80% of the oil and gas, and they will be willing to supply at the lower prices that the tariff will involve for them. Why? First, the EU and us are buying 80% of the fossil fuel exports, and the infrastructure bottlenecks make it very hard to shift those exports to Asia. Second, production costs are low at $20 a barrel, so they will actually have to accept those lower revenues rather than shutting down the wells. In short, a tariff would allow us to shift Russian revenues to the European Union consumers, all while accelerating an end to European dependency on Moscow's fuels. Even if a high tariff comes with a cost for the European Union, it is a more efficient way to stop Putin than any of the other sanctions that we already have in place before the embargo comes in as fast as possible. Let's do it now. It must be a new tool in our armor, enhancing our capacity to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garicano. I now give the floor on behalf of the Green Group to Sarah Mathieu.
Thank you, Chair, Madame la Ministre, Commission President. We've condemned the horrible and unjustified invasion in Ukraine by the Russian military forces many times before. And the European Union was highly united in its response. Severe actions were implemented, and just last plenary, this Parliament demanded an embargo on all Russian fossil fuels, including gas. However, these sanctions will not only harm the Russian economy, they will also affect the lives of European citizens with a direct impact on their homes, their jobs, their wallets. And this could lead to more social inequality, to a rise of unemployment and an increase in energy poverty. We need to protect our citizens, and specifically those at risk of falling into poverty, people that are afraid of not being able to heat their homes next winter. We need a strong social response to their fears. The EU has the choice to leave no one behind, to mitigate the rise in energy costs, to ensure decent and affordable housing for all. The EU has the choice to protect workers on the labour market against unemployment. The EU has the choice to ensure that climate transition is a fair transition where industry pays its fair share. We need minimum wages, minimum income protection for all, and a European unemployment scheme. Colleagues, we have the possibility to protect our citizens against the hardships of war. Well, now is the time to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mathieu. Next, on behalf of the ID Group, Jordan Bardella.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, Madame.
Thank you very much, President. President of the Commission, for 2 months, the horror of war is striking our continent. At our doorstep, we see these events, and we want to demonstrate solidarity faced with the atrocities and war crimes. We see the collateral economic damage, and we see that those with the least are being hit the hardest, and are struggling to feed themselves or heat their homes, and are becoming more and more anxious. It's really a question about our dependencies, that on imported fossil fuels that we, and also agricultural products which are being produced far from home. This teaches us the lesson of history. Sovereignty is the price of liberty, and so we need to strengthen our energy autonomy by supporting nuclear energy, which is the cleanest, most carbon neutral energy we have at the moment, and stop giving in to the pressure from the Greens. It is also our duty to regain our food sovereignty on the basis of fair trade. And we need to encourage local production, and all of this will protect our agriculture. And all of this is undermined by the farm to fork strategy of the Commission, which condemns our farmers to ruin. And we calls for urgent measures for purchasing power of our citizens. We have to reduce taxes on coal, on fuel. And we see that energy sanctions being taken by Europe have undermined our purchasing power while enriching Russia. The high rates and we are exporting, they are benefiting from the exports of raw materials. And there was a purchase of Lada in Russia for a notional amount. And this is undermining French governments to make it possible for Russia to nationalize them free of charge. And so we need to look at gas and oil, and we need to sanction those who are benefiting from war, and we need to move away from dependency. We need to follow a simple principle. The sanctions need to punish Putin and not to hit the wallet of European citizens or companies, and I would ask you to think of them. Thank you.
Merci. Next, on behalf of the ECR Group, Raffaele Fitto.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President, Minister, President of the Commission. Well, I've listened with a great deal of attention to the speeches this morning, and I think it's very useful and important that we hold this debate this morning to try and find immediate solutions to this conflict. There's no doubt that the path that has been taken so far is one that we need to pursue with decisiveness, because the packet of sanctions that have been put forward is clearly a decisive element that we need to work on to ensure that we get results. But a sanctions package is also fundamental to the decisions that have to be taken in Europe. These measures are not incredibly popular across our continent because they could lead to serious consequences. Of course, the long-term objective of reconstruction in Ukraine is fundamental, and the Commission is absolutely right to have its eye on this. But at the moment, we have to face the situation before us. Europe's exports in February and March is 6% down. We need a strong response. A compensation fund. Well, we saw that one was used for Brexit. Well, we could have a similar solution here. sanctions do not affect all countries in the same manner. There are some countries that face more serious consequences than others. Second issue, it comes to the structural choices, as Mrs. de Langen raised, Fit for 55. Can you imagine that we won't be changing anything compared to what we envisaged before the war? Well, the war is an event that should make us think about the Commission's choices and the choices of the European institutions. Well, I think that is the case. Excessively ambitious targets that we find within Fit for 55 are an important aspect that we need to think about and adapt. And another concrete proposal, we need a response to the big economic issues we face, the Stability and Growth Pact, for example. This has been put off for later. There's no decision at the moment, but it's going to be important when it comes to taking the necessary measures. And this is an issue that we raised. Article 21 of the RRF states that in exceptional circumstances, this instrument, which carries important resources with it, can be modified to respond to events. Well, this is an article that was enshrined in the regulation that says that we may need to change national plans in response to new needs. Well, I think this is exactly the kind of circumstances that the article was written for, that we do need to be able to envisage a change of direction. And I'd like to close with one final comment. We need to be effective with sanctions, and for that there are two aspects that are required. We need a unified response to gas. If there is anyone who wants to take their own approach, that will weaken the overall approach.
Group Martin Schirdewan.
Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, President. In train stations in Europe, people are voluntarily welcoming refugees from Ukraine, providing them with protection, a home. Millions are looking for jobs and homes. At the moment in Ukraine, there's harvests which are being threatened, are blocked. There's no sunflower oil anymore. Butter prices have increased by 44% for vegetables, up to 30%. Food prices in the EU are exploding, and the supply chains are saying that there could be a worldwide crisis and hunger, and energy prices have gone through the ceiling, and 36 million people in the EU are not able to heat appropriately. Those are figures from the Commission. And following the pandemic, the war shows that there are problems with energy supplies. All of this is leading to explosion of prices, increasing inflation. We've got food prices increasing, energy prices increasing, and inflation is eating up wages and pensions. And so for that reason, we need an energy price cap so that we can fight against increasing energy prices. We need a European effort at the moment to help the poorest households and protect them against inflation, energy poverty and hunger. And for that, we need a tax on armaments companies, on energy producers, because their profits are increasing, and also large companies like Amazon and Google benefited hugely from the pandemic, and that would be a first step to mitigate some of the social consequences, and that would release funds that are coming from production, and that would make it possible to support those fleeing war. It is true that we need to work towards independence from gas and oil from Russia, I think we need to make sure that these monies go into a socially fair energy. And that's not just a question of Russian gas and oil, it's a gas and oil from any source. And some of the sanctions which have been passed are not helping. The homes, yachts and cars of the oligarchs need to be kept in the same condition. And so now European taxpayers are paying to maintain these frozen assets. I think that's absurd. They need to be expropriated and used for other purposes, and all of the benefits from that would have to go to the benefit of refugees and not to the maintenance of yachts of oligarchs.
And now on behalf of the non-attached members, Martin Gyongyeshi.
Thank you, Madam President, colleagues, President von der Leyen. There is a broad consensus here and in other EU institutions that economic sanctions on Russia are the most effective way of pressurizing Russia to stop its aggression in the Ukraine. The speed, the efficiency and accuracy of the sanctions proposed by the Commission need to be commended, especially its efforts to create an unprecedented unity among member states. It is unfortunate that it took such a disaster to realize the unhealthy dependence of our continent on Russian energy supplies and start discussions about a unified energy market based on diversified energy resources and solidarity among member states. In the past weeks, Russia has demonstrated that it's ready to use energy as a strategic weapon to further its aggressive geopolitical objectives. It must be clear by now that Russia in the long term is an unreliable partner for supplying energy to the EU. Therefore, I would like to ask the Commission not only to focus on fossil fuels when it comes to sanctions, but also target nuclear energy. Nuclear deals struck by Russian Rosatom with various governments of various member states must be phased out. Finland showed the way by terminating the Fennovoima deal with Rosatom that supplied a nuclear reactor, was the financial backer of the project and the main shareholder. It's time that Hungary follows suit and terminates its equally controversial Paks deal with Rosatom. The Commission would be right in its next sanction package to ban every Russian nuclear deal on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Sigrid Muresan.
Thank you, Mr. President, President von der Leyen, dear colleagues. We have all seen Russia is a threat for the security of the European Union and will remain a threat for us for the foreseeable future. This is why we can only live in safety and stability within the borders of the European Union if we are surrounded in our immediate neighborhood by countries who are safe and stable. Helping Ukraine clearly means also helping ourselves. This is why the line needs to be continue supporting Ukraine, sanctioning the Russian Federation. President von der Leyen, we are welcoming the new package of sanctions which you presented to us, which you are putting forward. We as a parliament have demanded an immediate ban on imports of Russian oil, gas, coal and nuclear fuel. This is why, as the Commission will be implementing the ban on Russian oil, it has to be implemented, it has to take effect as soon as possible and in a way in which it does not allow for any loopholes and special treatments for member states, for companies, because this would endanger the unity of the European Union. Keeping our unity as we are also implementing this ban will be important, firstly. Secondly, as we reduce our dependency on Russian fossil fuels, we should not create dependencies on any other single route of transport, single source of energy or supplying country. We are seeing that any vulnerability, any weakness costs in times of crisis. What should we do within the European Union? Because the title of the debate is Social and Economic Consequences for the European Union. Firstly, we should use the existing tools which we have to strengthen our economy. There is still money available in the Recovery Resilience Facility because some member states have not accessed all of the loans component. We need to work with member states to see if they need the money, if they will access it, And if not, the position of our group of the EPP is to try to use those amounts for large energy projects, transnational energy projects, to interconnect, to bring energy to where it is needed within the European Union. If an amendment of the RRF regulation is needed for this, we should do it. Next point, use the decommitted amounts from the budget 2014-2020 to allow member states to spend the money on where they need it, particularly in helping refugees and host communities within the borders of the EU. And one last idea which helps Ukraine and helps the European Union is work towards integrating Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova into the EU single market as soon as circumstances allows. This will help Ukraine to develop by its own, with the cost being more controllable for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Das Wort hat nun Frau Agnes.
And now I give the floor to Agnes Jongerius.
Thank you, Chair. And colleagues, the title of the debate is the social economic consequences for the EU of the Russian war in the Ukraine. And of course, the consequences in the Ukraine are huge. But I think we should also be clear that the war in Ukraine plunges us also in a new social economic crisis. And with skyrocketing energy prices, with deep diving purchasing power, and with increasing inflation, I fear that the most vulnerable will bear the burden. And the question should be then, I think, what route are we going to take? It's our duty that the strongest shoulders bear the heaviest burden. While standing up against Putin and standing in solidarity with the Ukraine, in this crisis, we need to address the root causes of the long-term economic and social imbalances. I think it's time to break the vicious circle of raising inequalities and privilege for the super rich. There are many things to fix, and those who are increasing their profits exponentially and indecently are the ones to pay the price first. And therefore we need more than just an extension of the escape clause. We need a European solution. We need money to accommodate the refugees from the Ukraine. We need support for the citizens and small businesses for rising energy prices. Madam Minister, I think we should not talk about energy poverty anymore. We are talking about actual poverty, people who cannot pay their bills anymore. And therefore, my proposal is to organize a social summit with the social partners to tackle the challenges of increasing inflation, increasing inequalities and its social consequences, especially on the living conditions and wages. We need to update the action plan of the social pillar. We need European action. Thank you.
Merci. Madame Valérie Ayé, you are the next one.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, Madam Minister, colleagues, every day that passes, we are sending billions of euros to Putin through coal, gas and oil purchases. These hundreds of millions allow him to pay his soldiers and increase his military spending. We have to put an end to this war economy and not feed it further. Commissioner, we can't imagine that the EU can get through this without suffering any pain and without solidarity. So we need to go further. We should be mutualizing the costs of this war for our companies, for our citizens. If we are imposing sanctions, then we have to take the necessary consequences at the European level. But that's not all. Trying to respond is one thing, but trying to preempt future developments is another. Let's take a step back. Are we going to continue to be at the mercy of Vladimir Putin. If we had taken a choice 8 years ago when Moscow entered Crimea, wouldn't the story have been very different today? If we had been stronger, if we had got away from our dependence on Russian hydrocarbons and hydrocarbons in general, I think that would have changed things significantly. That's incontestable. This invasion and its consequences are our last warning. So, yes, we do need to create, say, a fund for our strategic economy in Europe. We need to get out of our dependence by the end of the decade. When we're talking about critical industries, defense, hydrocarbons, agricultural inputs, we need to take the necessary consequences, seize our destiny. We have to make Europe a Europe that protects. Time will not forgive us if we don't.
Merci. Excuse me, monsieur. Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Ernest Ursula.
Thank you, Chair, Commission, Council. Let me first welcome the President von der Leyen announcement on the ban to Russian oil to be included in the new sanctions package. This support to Ukraine needs to go hand in hand also in supporting our citizens most affected from the consequences of war. We are at the doors of possibly the third once-in-a-lifetime deep crisis that generations of Europeans will suffer. The cumulative crises have led to devastating social consequences in our continent. 96 million people in the EU are already at risk of poverty. Increased inequalities, the return of war in Europe, and the existential threat of climate change is a scary prospect. And once again, history knocks at the doors of the European project. During the pandemic, the EU learned how to respond to difficult economic and social situations after the disastrous years of the authoritarian lunacy. Now we need to show that this willingness to protect our citizens will be the norm and not the exception. Price inflation in the EU has reached levels not seen since the 70s, but half, we know, is directly due to fossil energy price rises. And it is why we need action on the energy sector. It is not time, in our opinion, to restrict our accommodative monetary policy, which would have disastrous economic consequences, but to accelerate our energy transition. And it is not time either, I'm sorry to say, to postpone our Green New Deal. I mean, climate change does not wait, and we know that our Green Deal and energy transition is the best solution to the crisis that we are having, so I cannot more than disagree with what the EPP has said this morning today in the plenary. We know that we need to accelerate that energy transition, and for that, we will probably need also no financial instruments to be put in place. That is why we want also to call for a new energy sovereignty facility to facilitate member states to accelerate that transition. We know that politically this is difficult. Putting in place the RRF was a difficult process, but we need to be ambitious, and I'm sure that we will be able to do that again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Jörg Madison.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner, Councillor. First of all, I was checking yesterday morning about the statistic that how much have you paid to Russia for the gas and oil and for the coal. And in the first 2 months after the war, the biggest buyer and the payer for Russia is, of course, Germany. The second one is Italy. The third one is Turkey, and the fourth one is Netherlands. And if I compared the prices, what we paid, I mean we as Europeans, what we paid to Russia for the gas and oil, it was 3 times higher amount of money than it was exactly on the same time in last year. And, of course, the Germans and others who are buying the gas from Russia, they're saying it's the market price. But the problem today now, what we have is that we, as Europeans, are paying 3 times more money to Russia. And we are saying that, well, it's a market price, but it's not true. The Russians are saying, you have to pay this amount of money for the gas, otherwise we will not sell it. And we are not the smartest ones, and we are paying this money. So it means that every day we are paying hundreds of millions of euros to Russia to have the energy resources, and they are using this money for the military and for the war machine against Ukraine, maybe tomorrow against Moldova, maybe in few days against Baltic states or against Finland. So what is my point? We have now in the situation, and now the summer is coming, so it's the good time, but it's September, October, November, when the winter is coming. We will be again in the situation where we are paying many, many times more money for the resources, for the energy from Russia to have a warm house, to have functioning technology, to have functioning businesses. And that's why today the Germans and Austrians and also Hungarians, unfortunately, have to say, unfortunately, they are saying that, no, we can't stop now the import for the energy from Russia. But we have to think now how to survive next winter, because otherwise we will be screwed. And otherwise we are still paying more and more money, 3 times more than last year to Russia, and this money will be used for the new occupations, for the new explanations, and that's the fault of the European energy policy. We have to learn from the mistakes, what we have done, and look for the next winter. Thanks so much.
Danke.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Mrs. Beata Szydło, 2 minutes 30.
Panie Przewodniczący.
President, Minister.
Dear colleagues.
Ladies and gentlemen, human life cannot be quantified, but money is important to support Ukraine and to make sure that this period is not so.
Z nas tylko i wyłącznie w tej chwili takie myślenie, że konsekwencje tej wojny odbiją się też na nas wszystkich. Tak, one się odbiją na nas wszystkich, ale im szybciej ta wojna się skończy, im szybciej powstrzymamy Putina, tym będzie po prostu możliwszy, szybszy pokój.
The faster we stop Putin, we will be able to ensure peace in Ukraine. We need to take decisive steps and make sure that there is solidarity. It's good that the 6th package is being introduced a little bit too late, but hopefully it's going to be effective, and hopefully next time in Strasbourg we will be able to say that this package is effective, because so far one may have an impression that decisions were being made but that they were not being implemented. To stop Putin, we must be decisive and we must be consistent and courageous. Today we need that courage. We should not be afraid to stop Putin, and we should not be afraid to say enough is enough. We must draw our conclusions for what we have neglected in the Union in the past. And one more thing. Ukrainian refugees require help, and the member states that support refugees need funds. We cannot quantify human life, but to support the refugees, we need funds. And therefore, similarly as in the past, we need to create a special fund that will help the member states that are helping Ukraine.
Thank you. Das Wort hat Herr Nikolai Willumsen.
The next speaker will be Mr. Nikolai Willumsen.
The war in Ukraine is horrific. We must do everything in our power to stop it, to help the Ukrainians. It is important that the EU implements sanctions, but they're clearly not tough enough to make Putin pull back his troops. Therefore, we need to increase the pressure. We must stop the imports of Russian oil and gas. We need to hit Putin and the oligarchs where it hurts. The war and solidarity with Ukraine will also affect our own economy. Therefore, it is vital that we protect our low-income families. This is also part of our fight against Putin, because the broadest shoulders, of course, need to carry the heaviest loads. It is tragic that so many families are struggling to make ends meet and need to choose between food or heating. That's not the way it should be in the EU in 2022. Nobody should starve or be forced to leave their home. We need to protect the weakest in our society. It is vital if we are to stand together against Putin. Let us tax the excessive abnormal profits. Let's stop the speculation in increasing food, energy and raw material prices. Let us help the Ukrainian refugees. The Ukrainian refugees are welcome in the EU, and like all other refugees, they deserve to be treated well, also by the labour market. Therefore, we need to make clear demands on the employers so that our Ukrainian friends are not paid below normal levels or misused in other ways. Therefore, we need clear social demands for payouts on EU funds. And our taxpayers' money should not go to companies that do not stick to collective agreements or who hide in tax havens. EU money should not go to greedy employers or rich people who let down the community. Dear colleagues, let's instead stand together against Putin. Let's protect low-income families, and let's stand in solidarity in this terrible war. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you. And now the next speaker will be Mr. Ludek Niedermayer.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues, dear guests. A cruel, illegal and irresponsible attack of Putin Russia on Ukraine has killed so far thousands of people, brought full-scale war to Europe's territory, and destroyed remaining naive trust to a rule-based relationship with Russia. Economic and social implications are only part of this, as Esther has mentioned in her speech, but this is the part that shouldn't be neglected. We are dealing with a difficult combination of high inflation that will be boosted by the war, the implication for some member states of high inflow of refugees, as well as disruption of the businesses for firms that had ties with Russia or Ukraine. Lack of public confidence is only completing the picture. Most of the economic forecasts are still assuming very moderate impact on economic growth in the magnitude just slightly above 1%. This is something that we can deal about, but these assumptions are based on the condition that there is no disruption of energy supply to Europe. We should also have in mind that the impact is not equally spread. Anyway, we must take some policy action. This should be fact-based, but should be effective and quick. First, we must get ready for interruption of the gas supply. Every day, Moscow can decide to cut the supply. Better preparation means that the damaging cost will be lower. Secondly, I guess it's economically rational to react with domestic social and economic policy, especially on high energy prices. But at the same time, instead of building temporary permanent support mechanism, we should speed up introduction of renewables and energy efficiency. We must make sure that we will reduce the red tapes and any other measures that are slowing down the economy. More economic growth means also lower unemployment and smaller problems of the fiscal policy. Last not least, we must redirect EU funds to deal with the current challenges and use the sources that we have effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jonas Fernandez, the floor is yours.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias.
Good morning. Thank you, President, Commission, Council. I'd like to start this debate by congratulating the European Commission for the new package that they presented this morning. And of course, for the leadership that they've shown in taking decisions to help Ukraine and to undermine the intentions of Putin. We hope that Council will maintain the unity that we've seen in past months. There have been some proposals which haven't seen support, but we want to minimize the probability of problems within the Council. The debate on the effects within the European Union is a complex one. There are social aspects, as we have heard. We have to take in these millions of refugees who have come to Europe, and at the same time there are economic consequences that are not easy to tackle. High inflation and some of the growth forecasts are rather difficult. So in the spirit of consensus that we have in this Parliament, we have to keep in mind that the vast majority of measures that have been taken so far by Member States for example, have been taken by Member States. For example, if you look at my country, we see that the right doesn't want to support the government at this very difficult time. Often politics haven't responded in a rapid time to the increase in inflation. We have to look at what's happening in the United States, for example, and we have to also remember that we have the possibility to open up new tools to ensure that we can respond economically and to show solidarity, including with the sanctions that we will support jointly. Thank you.
Thank you. Herr Kollege Dragos Pislariou, you are the next one.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner, Madame la Ministre Klinker, we have spent the past 2 years talking about how to emerge from the COVID-19 crisis stronger. We have spent 2 months of war in Ukraine doing the same. A crisis has this green gift of providing ample supplies of one of the most elusive and valuable resources Europe needs, the political will to embrace change and to do the things that need to be done. I applaud the continuation of the sanctions, but we are still far away from the Parliament position. We still need ambitious tools and the instruments to move forward. In the pandemic, we have created the RRF and other funds and measures that showed solidarity, that kept our businesses, sometimes barely afloat, and helped our citizens. Now, in 2 months, we have moved defense supplies of an unprecedented scale and opened our countries to many more millions of Ukrainian refugees that we had seen during the 2015 refugee crisis. We do have right now a momentum of political will to reinforce our capacity to act for all Europeans, Ukrainians included, as they firmly belong in Europe by culture, values, geography, and now by bravery and commitment. I think it is time, indeed, to use the RRF at its full potential, to use all the resources, to use all the lessons learned and the solutions for the member states, and this is part of the response. But at the same time, we should focus indeed, and I was really pleased to hear today that there is a discussion about the recovery plan from Ukraine. And for that, we need indeed to use the lessons learned from the RRF that are indeed valuable. The world will never be the same again, and a Russia with Putin in charge will never again be a partner for Europe. So there is no more status quo to return to, and we need to create a new normal, one with reinforced financial tools that will ensure no European is left behind in the aftermath of Putin's war, and Ukraine and Moldova as well get welcome their need from the EU, and that we emerge once again stronger together. Thank you.
Frau Kollegin Terry Reintke.
Madam Terry Reintke, you're the next speaker.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, dear Minister. The President is right. European history will be written in Ukraine. That is why our support for a free European democracy against the brutal Russian aggression is paramount right now. And it is our historic responsibility to do everything possible to show this solidarity, including hard and far-reaching sanctions, and I'm happy to hear that a deal has been reached on a ban of Russian oil. It is an important next step, but it is certainly not the last one that we will need. And while this Parliament strongly supports the sanctions, we also already see the negative consequences this war has for Europe. After years of pandemic, we see the economic struggle of many households in the European Union. And our reaction to the pandemic, despite some challenges in the beginning, was based on one of our strongest assets, solidarity. With the Next Generation EU Fund, we managed to show that we can stand together in times of crisis. And the same, and probably more, is needed now. Because we all know what Putin is trying to do. He's trying to divide us, to play member state against member state, and to count that the social hardship that we will face will dry out our firm support for Ukraine. Putin is trying to divide Europe, to divide our societies. He's counting on our inability to manage this great challenge together. We cannot, colleagues, and we will not let him succeed in this. Let us show that we will face this challenge together, the East and the West of Europe, the North and the South. Let us show that all that he's succeeding in will be to revive the European social model, the promise of a European Union where nobody will be left behind. For that, we will need joint efforts, investments, a solidarity fund to balance out the social inequality. And we will have to proceed in creating a real social safety net on the European level by finally introducing a European minimum wage, closing the gender pay gap, and yes, also a European minimum income. This continent is weakest when it's divided and strongest when it is united. Let us be united against Putin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unser nächster Sprecher, Marco.
Our next speaker is Marco Campomenorzi. 2 minutes 30.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here with us. The consequences on the social and economic fabric of European countries are, of course, significant. However, the positive side is that we are all united. We're supporting the sanctions and the new package. This is correct, and it is yielding results. Of course, it has having consequences in terms of costs to our system and our business model. But we need to move forward because it's an important strategy. The unity that we've demonstrated here is important. However, it shouldn't prevent us from properly analysing the situation that is arising, including in terms of the mistakes that we've made in the past. We have arrived at this dependence on Russia, including just a few weeks before the outbreak of war. There were some people here who were supporting projects like Nord Stream 2. So we have projects that we need to look at for this, but of course they will take time to implement. We've seen problems, for example, such as storing energy resources for the next winter. We also have to look at the question of payments in rubles or euro, because business needs clarity. So I think it would be helpful if the Commission could clarify some of these points. We're seeing also tensions arising on the market. There's inflation, purchasing power for families, as colleagues have said, is also becoming a problem. At the heart of it, what's at question here is the competitiveness of our system. The food sector is already experiencing consequences, and our social systems risk paying very dearly for this. As well as our colleagues, politicians at national and regional level. As a number of colleagues have already said, however, we shouldn't make the mistake with the Stability and Growth Pact, going back to the mistaken standards that we did in the past, and we should continue to grow as we have over the last 20 years. And also the Fit for 55 package is leading to costs for business, often enormous costs. And these were put together for a pre-pandemic Europe. Imagine how unsuitable they are for Europe at war. Thank you very much.
Ich bitte Herrn
Robert Roos would be the next speaker.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, the social and economic consequences of the Ukrainian war are huge. That is clear, particularly given that we've got high inflation, and but the greatest challenge is not because of the it's the policy of the ECB, which has been feeding money into the system. And we have also crippled our economy with lockdowns. And then there's the Green Deal from the EU, which is leading to inflation and increasing the cost of energy and food. But through the war, energy prices have gone even higher. And this is a fundamental factor in the economy and part of our welfare. I think it is clear that Russia attacked Ukraine. And I understand very well why we want to do something to protest against that. I have pleaded for EU union against Russian, but we have to make sure the sanctions are working. Are they having the desired effect on Russia? And now we're going to go further with a new round of energy sanction. Not just because of the rising energy prices, Russia is increasing. The prices have increased as a result of sanctions. And the world is bigger than the EU. And if we're importing gas, there's more strain on the economy. And people, we need to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. It is a time for politicians to look at the welfare of our citizens. And I just want to say that Russia is getting rich and Europe is moving into poverty. And we need to have a solution. We need to get people around the negotiating table, and that needs efforts by Ukraine and the EU. Thank you.
Das Wort hat nun.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Lydia Pereira.
Mr. President, fellow Europeans, war is at our gates. Europeans are suffering with fuel prices on the rise, with food prices, particularly bread and other essentials, going through the roof. In fact, many Europeans are facing difficulties to which we cannot turn our faces in denial. But we need to face the social and economic consequences of this war, not only inside the EU, but also in Ukraine. We must not just walk or talk the talk, we must do the walk. We must reinforce our capacity to walk the walk, not just for today, but also for tomorrow. We must not settle for a few good speeches and beautiful words and loads of indignity in social media. We must do what we can do as soon as we can to make sure that something like this does not happen again. We need a legal freeze and seize instrument. We need to make Russia pay for war reparations to Ukraine. And we need that money. We need to help creating an adequate recovery plan to rebuild Ukraine's infrastructure and relaunch Ukraine's economy. We can be divided into many things, and we frequently are. After all, debate and discussion are what a parliament is about. But dear friends, we cannot be divided about defending Europe from autocratic regimes. We shall not be divided about responding to other countries blackmailing us. And we will not be divided about putting European security, solidarity and friendship above anything else. Long live Europe and long live freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Ich bitte nun Herrn Pedro.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Pedro Marques.
Vielen Dank, Presidente, Ministre, caro.
Madam Minister, Vice President of the Commission, the barbarian war, the barbarous war between Russia and Ukraine calls for us to give all our solidarity to the Ukrainians now and in the future and with its people. Now we need sanctions that weaken the regime and the Russian economy, reducing their capacity to feed the war machine, but they also have an impact on Europe and our citizens. It's a price that we're ready to pay for peace and for freedom. Today, the peace and freedom of the Ukrainians, but if we do nothing, it will be ours at stake. Now, in many cases, we have not gone as far as the European Parliament would have liked, but today we have an oil embargo which will affect the Putin regime seriously. We've also got a clear message to pass on to the Commission and to the other European institutions and the Council. Our capacity to stay united in our response to Russian aggression is also going to depend on whether we're able to manage the economic and social consequences here in Europe. And as sanctions against Russia increase in intensity, counter-sanctions and energy prices in Europe are going to affect our economy and our citizens. We have to maintain European unity. That has been of great value in our response to Russia's aggression. But now we need to support Europe's citizens and companies. There have been lots of good ideas presented here, some good ones, some less good ones. But when it comes to the European response, we need to move strongly in favour of renewable energies. We need to support the companies that are affected by high energy prices, but not the energy multinationals that are making obscene profits. They need to be taxed, and we need to support citizens who are suffering energy poverty and the effects of energy poverty. And we'd need to support all of those who are helping the refugees that are coming our way. That means defending Europe, defending Ukraine, and defending Europe's peoples. Thank you.
Danke. Unsere nächste Sprecherin ist.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Vice President Nicola Beer.
Minister. President, Minister, EU is finally moving. We finally have an oil embargo in sight. We Europeans need to take this step. Because it's no point in just pointing the finger at Russia. That's not going to stop the war. Following the decisions on the delivery of weapons, the oil embargo is a long-needed sanction because it can undermine Russia. European credibility at the side of Ukraine against the aggressor Russia is then strengthened. This is something that I've been missing. But it's not going to be without cost. The energy embargo will have an impact on Europe. Despite the transition period, there will be impacts on people, and there will be bottlenecks between Portugal and Poland. And we talk about replacing Russian raw materials. There will be sex, but we need to be resolute. We need to be ready to pay this price because, colleagues, the European Union is able to sustain these impacts and mitigate the impact, but we need to remember that there are other regions, other continents that are not able to bear this burden as easily and don't have the advantages that we have. But nevertheless, we mustn't deviate from our course, and we shouldn't be affected by threats from Putin. We shouldn't feel undermined by them. We can do this because if we don't want history to criticize us and say that it wasn't, we didn't do enough to eliminate war from our vocabulary, and we need to make sure that we provide every possible support to Ukraine. They are fighting for our freedoms. Let's put Russia in the cupboard and do it now.
Herr Kollege, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much. Mr. Munir Sartouri, the next speaker.
La ministre, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Madam Minister, Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Ukraine is facing the worst time in its history. Europe must show solidarity with those who have been attacked. To do this and to live up to its own words, Europe and the member states also have to strengthen their internal social solidarity. We have to prevent Vladimir Putin's war from creating social discord within the EU. Europeans are facing increasing energy pressure and inflation. The right to housing, as well as the right to food, must be guaranteed. We have the means to do that, so we have to mobilize the funds that are necessary to allow people to live. This crisis should bring the European Union to question and to change its social policies to protect the most vulnerable. We have to act in a united manner against the consequences of this crisis on the and its impact on the social arena and unemployment. And so this is why I call upon the French presidency of the Council to show how ambitious it is when it comes to the draft directive on the minimum wage that is currently being negotiated. A minimum wage has to ensure decent living standards for all workers. I also call for a joint initiative to ensure a minimum income. After COVID, after years of increasing precarity, this war should bring us to believe all the more in our union and our Europe. We have to act in a practical manner to strengthen our social policies. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ivan Stefanec.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. For a third month in a row, brave Ukrainians are facing criminal Russian aggression and are defending freedom not only in their homeland but throughout Europe. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to visit Kiev, visit Irpin and Bucha. After the Russian invasion, I saw all the horrors of the Russian crimes. For instance, in Bucha, there is not a single military facility, and yet Russian aggressors have been attacking civilians from the first day of their aggression. I saw mass graves, I saw bombed houses, burnt cars, I saw toys in front of damaged houses. These are pictures that are unforgettable. And also, it's absurd that the war criminal Putin is honoring these war criminals for their acts. What Russians see as heroism, all normal people see as a primitive crime, and crimes should not be honored, they should be punished. I therefore welcome the penalties for these criminals, and also I welcome the new sanctions package. I also welcome the inclusion of the Russian disinformation channel in the new sanction package. For years, we've been inactive against Russian propaganda. It's high time for us to act now. But we need to go even further. In order to protect life in Europe, we need to de-Russify Europe. Let's not be afraid. Let's cut off our dependence on Russian energy. Some countries are very dependent, including my country, Slovakia. I therefore understand all the worries. But the solution is in finding a common approach, in building a common market, in energy, in joint purchasing. There are solutions. We need to protect freedom, we need to protect human life and dignity, just as Christian Democrats have done in Europe. It is all the more valuable today. We need to see their acts as an example, as a role model. By helping Ukrainians, we will help ourselves. The human life has more value than any money in the world.
Zu Wort gemeldet hat sich Frau.
The next speaker is Mrs. Elsi Katainen.
Kiitoksia puhemies.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, Russian war of aggression to Ukraine is for Europe also makes maybe the biggest ordeal and is testing us. We have been created to make peace, and now it's been disrupted in the worst possible way since the Second World War. A war is raging in Europe, and Russia wants to disunite us and the Union. And the latest example of this is turning off the gas taps in Bulgaria and Poland. I want to appeal to all decision makers, look at the long line of history and make an end of our dependency on Russian energy. This will have economic consequences and challenges, but morally we have to be strong enough to bear the consequences. We cannot accept this invasion, bloodshed and bombings of children's hospitals. The EU must be able to be united and stay united and have united decisions. The war's consequences, economic and social ones, hit us all. More than 5 million Ukrainians have lost their homes, and the EU must be able to assist and help them. The rise in energy prices affects the food markets. Commissioner Timmermans estimates that in the EU there will be no food crisis are impossible to understand. The best medicine and way to deal with this crisis is to secure the position of food providers and energy suppliers. We have to speed up climate action, but be more rational because we are producing the cleanest food in Europe and emission-free energy. Now we can mitigate these social losses. Mutual debt, however, is not the road that our citizens in Europe want to go. Instead of this, we can make use of the pandemic recovery package because a lot of those funds are still unused. Thank you.
Mr. Jan Olbrycht, the floor is yours.
Panie Przewodniczący, Pani
President, Commissioner, Minister. Today we are talking about the social and economic consequences for the EU, but let's not talk about what the consequences will be, but what they may be. And when we talk about this, we should think about what we are going to do as the EU in order to reduce negative consequences as much as possible. What are we going to do? What steps are we going to take? We welcome the next package of sanctions, but we must start thinking about how the EU will continue functioning, how it will be organized, how it will be managed, and how it will be financed. I am the rapporteur responsible for the MRF, and I have a question to the Commissioner. Does the multi-annual financial framework, is it ready to stand up to the challenges of the war? Is this a structure that is ready for this sort of difficult, serious crises? And I'm not talking about this war, but any crisis. The answer is clear. It is not well prepared for such challenges. We must change that. The European Parliament is now ready to answer the calls by the Commission and Council to change the multi-annual financial framework. We need another mechanism. It's not about just wanting or needing more money. We need to rethink some budgetary mechanisms. The budget must be more flexible, more ready for challenges. It cannot send unused money back to the member states. This money must stay within the budget. And I hope that this time the Council will understand that. So we must take steps and not only talk about what the consequences of the war will be. Thank you very much.
Marek Belka, you are the next one.
Panie Przewodniczący.
President, instinctively, many governments take tax measures, but this may have counterproductive consequences, and this may not benefit the citizens. Given the challenge of the war, we need to have more precise instruments. Apart from sanctions, we should put pressure, tax pressure on imported fuels. Solidarity should be measured not in words but in euros. We should make it clear Germany, the Netherlands will be able to support their companies in case of losses, but such member states are not many. And the attack on Ukraine will affect all of us. For example, in Poland, refugees are mainly supported by the citizens and local authorities. So we should support the citizens and local authorities that help the refugees directly. Because without this support, we will not be able to continue supporting the refugees. Solidarity is the catchword for the last few months. We need to move on to long-term and well-thought measures. This is about the future, and I like to refer to the words of the previous speaker. The war in Ukraine is an enormous challenge of deep economic management in Europe. Next Generation EU should be the permanent feature of our system. We should change the Stability and Growth Pact so that the flexibility is combined with discipline.
Thank you.
The next speaker is our colleague Sandra Calnietti.
Mr. President, Commissioner, Madam Minister, Ukraina ir un būs piederīga Eiropai. Mums ir jāapzinās, ka kopš Krievijas
Ukraine belongs to Europe, and it will belong to Europe in the future. And we need to understand that Ukraine is living in the shadow of war. But we are in security at the moment. We are not being killed. We are not having to hide in cellars. And so it's not a question of calculating the increase in inflation at the moment. I think the increase in inflation is the least that we can do to help Ukraine to win the war. None of the leading finance institutions in the world are predicting a recession in the European Union. Even the worst case scenario talks about an inflation rate of about 2%. But if we compare it in the Baltic country, the inflation was 12%, the highest increase in the EU. So that means that the citizens in the least well-off countries are bearing a heavier burden than the richer countries. The longer the war lasts,